In what other show can you watch a complex discussion about the real-world applications of ethical philosophy and hear the word fart knocker? The Good Place is Michael Schur's creation. It premiered back in 2016 and is currently completing its fourth and final season right now. But in its run over the last several years, The Good Place has quickly become something of a sensation. So today, let's dig into The Good Place to see what makes The Good Place so good. And don't worry, we won't spoil anything. Let's start with the ethical philosophy presented in the show. While many mediums attempt to purposefully weave philosophical concepts into its narrative, The Good Place opts rather to weave the narrative into the philosophy. So what I mean is, instead of tricking you into learning by placing its lessons into neatly obfuscated metaphors, The Good Place revels in its ability to dish you up a hot, fresh burrito of learning through laughing and lots of insanely creative storytelling. And that philosophy that the show presents is going to jog your memory from every ethical philosophy class you've ever taken. The works of Descartes, Kant, Thomas Aquinas, and several more are reflected with the major concepts of their philosophical arguments being discussed and even joked about. And oftentimes, the episode's dramatic tension tends to hang on how the philosophical concept might play out in the craziness of a fantastic dilemma presented in the episode itself. The show does this without taking a preachy tone at all, which, while I've never written an episode for primetime television, has to be a daunting task. I will admit that The Good Place isn't the first to do this. It's not too dissimilar from other sitcom plotlines, especially those that would involve a classroom, like Saved by the Bell or Boy Meets World, in which the cast would learn a lesson in a classroom, and that very concept would somehow play out in the episode. What makes The Good Place stand out is how unashamed it is at teaching you philosophy lessons. These lessons are explored in depth throughout an episode, and typically the characters are forced to make a moral choice to an ethical dilemma. It's a solid teaching tool, one that I can firsthand express that I've retained many lessons myself. And the beautiful thing about how the show is written is that these lessons aren't just served up to us, the audience. The characters are retaining this knowledge as the journey continues. These lessons aren't simply forgotten by the next episode, they're added to the ethical arsenal of the characters. And speaking of the characters, that brings up another pillar of what makes The Good Place so good. The narrative of The Good Place is amongst one of the most unique and tight narratives I can think of. Restricting the show to 4 13-episode seasons was genius to avoid the Lost effect. In other words, the show hitting a lull due to the writers having to pad out the series. There are setups in The Good Place that normal shows would write out an entire season arc on. The Good Place concludes those within the next episode or two, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up that the show masterfully employs plot twists to engage the audience and propel the plot forward. The show spends half its time moving at a breakneck pace, and the rest of the time performing engaging world building and fleshing out those characters. The world building accomplished in The Good Place is absolutely masterclass. Down to the smallest detail of set design, wardrobe, and the minuscule throwaway lines, every second of The Good Place presents an opportunity for the audience to absorb as much as they can about the afterlife presented in the show. The cast and the audience are constantly learning new information about the world and how our heroes fit in it. And because of this, the audience is incentivized to hang on every word, every phrasing, to analyze what that meant. And believe me, the show is weird. Some things that are spoken are so bonkers that we're just kind of forced to put that into an area of our brain dedicated to nonsense.
You get it.
This broke me. The dot over the I. That broke me. I'm done.
But somehow, even when the world building throws something at us that's so crazy, it still lands because it's incredibly imaginative. But it's not just the world building that causes us to hang on every word, it's the solid character development that's happening throughout the series. This isn't a spoiler, it was in the trailer of the show. The entire concept of the show starts with Kristen Bell knowing that she doesn't belong in The Good Place. This very revelation triggers a redemption arc that's so beautifully told, using humor and the extreme circumstances of the world around them. And it's not just Kristen Bell's Eleanor that is well written. Each of the main cast are given a surprising amount of depth, even when on the surface, these characters would seem one-dimensional. And I have to comment here, it's not just the writing that rounds out these characters so dynamically, it's the performance of these actors. Michael Schur helped bring together a cast of actors who would bring these characters to life. The show has a ton of heart, and these actors bring the concepts and the narrative to a genius level. And while the narrative alone is incredibly well done, it's accompanied by a humorous tone that somehow feels incredibly fresh. And to try to explain why something is funny tends to make it not funny, but this is a video essay after all. So I have noticed 3 motifs in the humor throughout the run. First, the show uses a lot of juxtaposition type jokes in every episode, meaning that the characters are experiencing something that we as an audience might come to one conclusion about, but the characters exhibit a completely different mindset. This isn't anything strange for a sitcom, it's just that the writing of The Good Place is so witty and the execution by the actors is just spot on. It lands almost every time. The second motif is that the show uses an insane amount of blink and you'll miss it Easter eggs. Whether it's the flavors of the yogurt shop that stay on screen for just a moment, or the point totals and all the good and bad actions of a person's life that show up on screen while Michael is talking in the first episode, or even the inclusion of little Sebastian in the background of one episode.
It's really him! Well done, Leslie, well done!
That's a Parks and Rec reference. The Good Place does not seem to mind spending an absorbent amount of time writing, editing, and compositing in these bits that will only be on screen for a matter of seconds. And this definitely contributes to the rewatchability of The Good Place. My absolute favorite personal example of this is when I noticed the name of the Jacksonville, Florida airport. Lastly, the show has a ton of inside jokes, and many shows have inside jokes. But what makes The Good Place so good at this is how masterfully it weaves these inside jokes into character development. The best example I can come up with is the use of Eleanor's "ya basic" insult.
Because guess what, Cheaty? You basic.
It's referenced several times throughout the series, and every time it's hilarious. But a few seasons in, there is a moment in which Eleanor uses that phrase as a praise instead of an insult. The joke still lands, but it does something to propel the narrative forward and demonstrate character growth in Eleanor. And the show has done this through every season, including references to Blake Bortles, Molotov cocktails, Not a Girls, and a lot more. So really, what makes A Good Place so good? Well, we talked about the philosophy, we talked about the narrative, and also the humor. But really, it's not just one thing that makes The Good Place so good. It seems to me that every person working on this show at every level is extremely competent at what they're doing and has such a passion for this show. Everything is done with excellence between the wardrobe, the set design, the lighting, the cinematography. Everything works together to create an extremely fun, extremely heartfelt, extremely weird, and extremely rewatchable story of redemption and connection. So you tell me, what do you think makes The Good Place so good? I'd love to hear what you have to say. And if you like this video, consider giving this a like. I've got plenty of these videos planned out, so subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time.